FilmStruck is dead. Long live FilmStruck. Like many of you, I woke up this morning to a horrible email telling me that FilmStruck will be gone as of November the 29th. Perhaps because the news was unexpected, or perhaps because the service had become more important to me than I really realized, the news hit me pretty hard. And while I haven't always been the biggest fan of social media, I will have to say that Twitter and Instagram were really helpful today in realizing that I wasn't the only one mourning the loss. True, FilmStruck was only 2 years old, but it really filled the space in the marketplace, really without any competition. Sure, Netflix is undoubtedly the biggest streaming service, but I kind of consider Netflix to be the streaming equivalent of the Fast and the Furious franchise. You keep paying for it not because it's good, but because it's just, you've been doing it for so long, it just seems like the normal thing to do. They certainly have some good original shows and a handful of good original movies, but in terms of non-original movie content, it's pretty lacking. Back when those little red envelopes used to arrive in the mail, it was easy to think that Netflix had every title known to man. But as the market's moved almost exclusively to streaming, the options for content have dwindled significantly. More on the reasons why in a moment. Then you have Amazon Prime. I'm a Prime member and I find it very much worth the investment, but primarily for the free shipping because it pretty much pays for itself rather than the content it offers in terms of movies. Hulu? They have a few TV shows, but other than that, not much to write home about. I actually used to subscribe to Hulu back when the Criterion Collection was on Hulu, but once it left to form FilmStruck, it didn't really serve much of a purpose for me. When FilmStruck was born, it was pretty much driven by the Criterion Collection. That, plus a rotating collection of independent, hard to find, and foreign films that made it for a small but really elite catalog of films. When I first signed up for the trial 2 years ago, my first thought was that I'll probably like the films, but there won't be enough content. But after the first week's trial, I was instantly sold, and I've been an annual subscriber ever since. The way I would always describe FilmStruck to, well, pretty much anybody that would listen, is that if you had Netflix, but all the movies on there were good, or at least important for some reason or another. Sometimes they were the first film of a director who went on to have a very illustrious career. Other times they were important films that changed the trajectory of film history. Other times they were just great films that highlighted the contributions of often overlooked communities. When you combine my FilmStruck subscription with me getting Turner Classic Movies through Sling TV, I was pretty much in cord cutter heaven. I waved DirecTV a long anticipated goodbye and got back to streaming some of the best films of all time for a lot less money. More on that later. Last year, when Warner Brothers decided to fold the Warner Archive app into FilmStruck, essentially merging FilmStruck and TCM, boy, I was on cloud 9. Seriously, all the best films the world had to offer in one place. If it weren't for sports, I am an FC Barcelona fanatic. I probably could have gotten away with just having FilmStruck as my only streaming service and been perfectly happy. It was a service by people who really loved film, for people who really loved film. Not for people who just want to see the latest blockbuster or the latest sequel. It was for people who took film seriously, and there was nothing else like it in the marketplace, which may be the reason why so few of us saw the closure coming. Unlike the perpetual black cloud that hangs over my MoviePass card as I just wait for that service to go under, there seemed to be really no reason for FilmStruck to go out of business. Sure, FilmStruck's business model was never going to offer the same revenues as a service dedicated to only streaming blockbusters. I'm not so naive as to think that overnight the world's going to start preferring early DeSica or Godard to the Marvel franchise. Although the world will be a much better place if they did. It's not like with FilmStruck closing we can now just shift all our money to another service. There really are no other services. At least none with the same focus on quality cinema and classic film. And no Netflix. Just because a movie was made more than 10 years ago does not mean it's a classic. Watching the closure kind of unfold online today, I was struck by the feeling, I may be wrong, that even people within Warner Brothers were a little bit surprised by the decision. From what I've been reading, and this again may be speculation, it sounds as though AT&T was really the driving force in deciding to close down the service. Just one of what I'm sure will be many negative consequences of their decision to buy Time Warner earlier this year. With Disney recently purchasing Fox Studios, I'd expect to see a massively different streaming landscape within 5 years. Heck, within 1 year at the rate we're going. I suppose if you look at it from that perspective, the closing shouldn't come as a surprise. AT&T is a telecom company. They couldn't care less about movies. They want to sell phones, sell data, or force you into buying a DirecTV bundle so they can increase the value of their other recent acquisition. No matter how beloved FilmStruck was among its customers, it was never going to be a major profit center for that company as a whole. So it makes sense that it would be one of the first things to go. While I may be critical of studio executives from time to time based on what movies they decide to greenlight and what movies they don't, at least they do still operate within a universe that's occupied largely by artistic people, people who care about the quality of a film. AT&T, they're only capable of seeing numbers. So what's the solution for those of us who are dedicated to seeing and preserving quality movies? I can't lie, it's going to be tough. We're dealing with an industry that's already based on constant change and is now going through one of the most volatile periods in its history. When silent films were replaced by the talkies, most of the films up to that point were simply thrown out into the trash. There's legends of them actually having bonfires with all the old silent films on Paramount set. When VHS became a thing, studios slowly began to migrate their more popular titles to the new form of home entertainment. One of the best decisions Lew Wasserman ever made as the head of Universal was to purchase the old Paramount archive, foreseeing that they would eventually have value in the future. Ted Turner's acquisition of the MGM catalog is really the basis for Turner Classic Movies as a channel. It could be said that his decision to purchase that catalog is one of the biggest reasons why you and I are classic movie fans in the first place. But with each successive generation, more and more film history is lost. Sometimes to literal flames like the bonfires. Sometimes they're lost because they're not seen as worth the investment to transfer them to the new medium. So every time we go from silent movies to sound movies, we lose a bunch of films. When we go to VHS, only the best films get transferred to VHS. Then only when we go from VHS to DVD, only the most popular titles make it from VHS to DVD. And then even less go to streaming. You see the problem. To make matters worse, there's a reason why Netflix has turned in the direction of original programming so hard in the last couple of years. Originally, the platform licensed product from existing studios through various licensing deals. But as Netflix grew in size, it became direct competition to the studios. Naturally, if you're a studio, why do you want to give product to a competitor? Netflix, seeing this coming, decided to start producing their own original content. And while they've been doing this in the background, slowly but surely, all the stuff that has been licensed to them is starting to slowly but surely chip away, and slowly disappear without people knowing as Netflix pours more and more money into their original programming. What that means is that while the number of original assets on Netflix has grown, the number of actual movies has dwindled. And as I said before, they never really had much of a track record in terms of classic films. But we're headed to a world where Netflix's dwindling movie options are only a part of our problem. Disney has already announced the pending arrival of its own streaming service. That means that everything that Disney owns, from the Disney properties to ESPN to everything on Fox Studios, from the TV and the movies, from the Star Wars franchises, all that is pretty soon going to only be available on whatever Disney's streaming platform is. You would imagine AT&T would have the same idea for what it wants to do with the Warner Brothers assets. From movies and TV that come out of Warner Brothers Studios to HBO properties like Game of Thrones, expect to eventually be only able to get that on whatever AT&T decides is their own streaming platform. Essentially, all these little mini studios are going to try to make you buy their service independently. So whereas now you're spending $10 on Netflix a month, or maybe $100 a year on FilmStruck. Now you're going to have to buy a service from Disney. You're going to have to buy a service from AT&T. You're going to have to buy a service from NBC Universal. And it's going to all get very, very expensive. One would hope that the content that was on FilmStruck would have a home within that ecosystem. But I have my doubts. My guess is that whatever Turner Classic content there would be owned by Warner Brothers, and that's owned by AT&T. But whatever was part of the Criterion collection, I don't know how that was going to work licensing wise. One thing's for sure, after November 29th, we'll be headed, at least temporarily, to a pretty barren wasteland when it comes to quality movies on streaming services. My own personal dream is that sometime before November 29th, the powers to be or some billionaire comes up with a way to spin off TCM, Criterion Collection, and all the elements that make up FilmStruck into a separate entity. It wouldn't get Wall Street out of bed, but it would be profitable. There are millions and millions of film fans out there who still care about quality films and are not satisfied by the latest superheroes or whatever regurgitated intellectual property AT&T decides to come up with. They deserve a streaming service that shares their love of film and treats the films and themselves with respect. That service existed, if only for a brief moment. It was called FilmStruck. FilmStruck is dead. Long live FilmStruck.